Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of the protests and riots in Los Angeles, California. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. In late 2024, Los Angeles reaffirmed its status as a sanctuary city. City officials declared they would not support the enforcement of immigration law. Donald Trump warned that he would target sanctuary cities with immigration enforcement efforts. He made it clear he would use the military against protesters without seeking consent from state governors. In May 2025, the Trump administration implemented a deportation strategy which involved federal agents raiding workplaces to arrest people who were not in the United States legally. Now moving to the timeline of the incident. On Friday, June 6, 2025, Immigration Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, executed a plan to raid several locations in Los Angeles to arrest illegal immigrants. Several other law enforcement agencies were involved, including the FBI, the ATF, and Homeland Security. Federal agents conducted an immigration raid at a Home Depot store in Westlake, just west of downtown Los Angeles. Another raid took place at an ambiance clothing store in the Fashion District in downtown. A few protesters arrived and confronted law enforcement. It was a small protest at this point. At around 6:30 p.m., over 100 people arrived at the Metropolitan Detention Center. Protesters threw objects, including pieces of concrete, at vehicles. Agents responded by deploying flashbangs, pepper spray, and tear gas. On Saturday, June 7, federal agents arrived at an industrial park in Paramount, California. Hundreds of protesters assembled, believing the agents were getting ready to raid a nearby Home Depot. They threw bricks and other objects at law enforcement, set off fireworks, and burned a dumpster. Agents responded with flashbangs and tear gas. Later that same day, protesters in Compton set a car on fire. Protesters also assembled at a different location and attacked ICE agents, slashed tires, and defaced property. Donald Trump federalized the California National Guard under Title X of the United States Code and deployed 2,000 members to protect agents and property in Los Angeles. On Sunday, June 8, protesters stormed the Metropolitan Detention Center in Los Angeles. They set fire to at least 5 Waymo driverless vehicles. Protesters also blocked the US 101 freeway, looted stores in downtown, set fires in dumpsters, and broke windows. On Monday, June 9, protesters converged in Grande Park. They were met with rubber bullets and flashbangs. On the same day, the National Guard presence was increased. Donald Trump referred to the protesters as insurrectionists. The Pentagon deployed 700 Marines to Los Angeles. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump accusing the president of deploying the members of the California National Guard without lawful authority and in violation of the Constitution. On June 10, 2025, protests and riots continued in Los Angeles. There were many instances of looting reported. A dead body was found near a T-Mobile store, but it's not clear if it was connected to the riots. At the time I'm making this video, there is no end in sight to the protests, the riots, and the looting. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Donald Trump deployed the National Guard by invoking a section of Title X of the United States Code, which grants the president this power under 3 circumstances: when the United States is being invaded or in danger of being invaded by a foreign nation, there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government, or the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Donald Trump called the protesters insurrectionists, which means the rebellion item could be satisfied depending on what qualifies as a rebellion. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump alleging that the president acted without lawful authority by deploying the National Guard. The lawsuit indicated that Donald Trump's actions were unprecedented. An invocation of Title X has only happened once before and under highly unusual circumstances not present in Los Angeles at that time. This is when Richard Nixon sent the National Guard to deliver the mail in the 1970 Postal Service strike. Exigent circumstances are required for the president to call the National Guard into federal service over the objection of the state. The founders of the United States distrusted military rule. Therefore, the U.S. Constitution strictly limits the domestic use of military, including the federalized National Guard. The Trump administration seeks to treat Title X as a mechanism to avoid time-honored constitutional limits. The protests or riots in Los Angeles have not reached the point of rebellion or insurrection. Local authorities have been able to manage the conditions. The lawsuit also mentioned that the National Guard members who have been diverted by Donald Trump are now not available for any emergency which might arise in California. Legal experts are divided by Donald Trump's directive. Some believe there is a clear precedent for his actions, so what he is doing is legal. Others maintain that this is an extraordinary measure which is not warranted by the circumstances, so his actions are not legal. Donald Trump may be able to prevail as far as the legal argument, but it is kind of a gray area. It works in his favor that the military forces were sent in simply to protect officers and property, not for crowd control. One can make a good argument that the rioters and the looters have placed federal agents in danger and damaged federal property. These offenders are looking to cause widespread destruction and overthrow the rule of law. For example, they want people who are in the U.S. illegally to be given a pass. In their minds, illegal immigrants are above the law. There is no way to reason with offenders who take such an extreme position. Despite the possibility that Donald Trump could be legally justified, I don't believe that deploying the military into civilian areas is normally a good idea. Historically, this has not worked out too well. For example, the massacre at Kent State on May 4, 1970. Item number 2, the police in Los Angeles have engaged in a disturbing habit of injuring journalists during this riot. Over 20 have been struck with less lethal projectiles, like rubber bullets, pepper balls, and sponge grenades. Many, if not all, of these journalists had their press credentials visible, and they were accompanied by camera operators. It was pretty obvious what they were doing. They could not be confused with rioters. A few examples of the attacks. A British reporter named Nick Stern was shot in the leg with a plastic bullet. He required surgery to have it removed. A correspondent for 9 News Australia named Lauren Tomasi was shot with a rubber bullet while conducting a live news segment. An officer can be seen pointing his weapon at her and firing. One can make a good argument that the officer's actions were intentional. A reporter named Toby Canham, who was on assignment for the New York Post, was standing just off the 101 freeway when a California Highway Patrol officer pointed a weapon at him and fired. Toby was struck in the head with a rubber bullet. Just like the shooting of Lauren Tomasi, this one appears to be intentional. Again, the officer pointed his weapon and fired. Some people are worried that the police are trying to discourage reporters from covering the riots. This is a reasonable conclusion based on the evidence. Item number 3, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Donald Trump is a polarizing president. Many of his behaviors are controversial. However, his position on immigration is generally popular. The majority of citizens approve of the way he is handling this issue. When federal agents conducted the raids in Los Angeles on Friday, June 6, 2025, they alarmed some of the locals. For example, the agents did not coordinate with the local police, and they were wearing tactical gear and driving armored vehicles. Their tactics seemed heavy-handed. In addition, Los Angeles had already declared its position as favoring illegal immigration. Again, it was a sanctuary city. Residents believed this would keep the federal government away, although this was not a logical conclusion. Several people started protesting in response to the federal agents, and the situation spiraled out of control. Seeing an opportunity to demonstrate antisocial behavior, rioters and looters joined the action. This was their big chance to cause destruction and to steal. To them, it was less about supporting a political issue and more about whether they could take a dozen iPhones from an Apple store. Gavin Newsom could have deployed the National Guard himself to take care of the riots, but instead, he pretended that nothing was wrong. The police were overwhelmed and admitted as much, but Gavin would not budge. He wasn't the only one to minimize the problem. For example, Hillary Clinton declared that Los Angeles was experiencing peaceful demonstrations, and one local reporter Tim Caputo, was recording directly in front of a riot when he said, quote, "I know President Trump had tweeted about riots and looting. I don't know that I would characterize it that way," unquote. If he had only turned around, he could have seen the riot himself. When Donald Trump saw what was happening in California, he decided to send in the military, even though this was pushing the limit of his authority. This is kind of a theme with his presidency. Maybe he did this because it was necessary, or maybe he did it to embarrass his political opponents. Either way, the majority of Americans support this decision, even aggressive enforcement of immigration law in workplaces. In a May 2025 poll, 54% of Americans approved of that program. Citizens have sent a clear message that they are tired of illegal immigration. They want rioters and looters to be dealt with severely. This is not a behavior that can be supported. Rioters are going to have an uphill battle in this political climate. No matter how many cars they burn, how many windows they break, how many agents they hit with pieces of concrete, they will not change opinions on illegal immigration. Americans want the law to be upheld. I think it's worth remembering that illegal immigration can be stopped without inserting the military into civilian matters. It is possible for a president to support a popular initiative in a way that is not necessarily ideal for preserving liberty in the long run. Sending in the military to deal with riots is a slippery slope, which could have unintended consequences. Those are my thoughts on the 2025 LA protests and riots. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.